G'day and welcome back to the channel, Ginger Ninja's Movie Reviews. I am the Ginger Ninja and these are my Franchise Friday movie reviews. And you can probably tell by the alien egg there what movie we're actually reviewing. Well, we're actually looking at the Alien franchise and we're up to Alien 3 from 1992. This is a very divisive one in the series, so let's get right into it. But before we do, I do want to say a big thank you to all my new and existing subscribers. Truly, it means the world to me. And I know I say it every week, but thank you so much for your continued support. Now, let's get into it. This film was directed by David Fincher. It stars Sigourney Weaver, Charles S. Dutton, Charles Dance, Paul McGann, and Lance Henriksen. The plot: returning from LV-426, Ellen Ripley crash lands on a maximum security prison, Fiorina 161. Whatever it is. Fury 161. Where she discovers that she has unwittingly brought along an unwelcome visitor. Now, when I first watched this movie many years ago, it was a theatrical cut. As a lot of us did when it first came out, we didn't have any other option because the assembly cut, as it's better known, that didn't come out until 2003. So yeah, over a decade later, we had to wait for a definitive version of this film. Now, the assembly cut actually has an additional 30 minutes of footage, making it a very different film. And I will point out a few of those differences later on. And, I'll try not to delve too deep into the issues between the director and the studio because everyone's, we were aware of all that stuff that happened back then. I want to look at the film and really look at what the film is and how it differs from the theatrical cut. It's, like I said, it's probably one of the most derived films of the franchise. But as Eric from Hey Internet Eric here says, is this film worth the hate? Well, let's dive into this molten mess and see what comes out of it.
Franchise Fridays on the screen, horror shows, zombies scream, vampires biting, shadows gleam, slasher delights in my dream. Shark master swims in fear, ghouls and ghosts, they appear. Sci-fi flicks, end is near, join the horror, shed a tear.
So kicking off with the cast, and it has a very solid cast of well-established and recognised actors. Charles Dance, Charles S. Dutton, Paul McGann, they all perform their roles well, and each very different. The sympathetic love interest of Charles Dance, which is something I never thought I would say, because I remember him from things like Game of Thrones and the bad guy in The Last Action Hero, things like that. So seeing him as a love interest, which I'll touch on in a bit as well, because that also is a bit of a sticking point with some people. The religious and almost zealot-like zeal of Charles S. Dutton and the absolute insanity of Paul McGann's character, which, again, different in the theatrical to the assembly cut for various reasons. Now, the problem is, while they perform their roles really well, they're not given enough to work with to make you feel invested in them. And that, and well, the fact that it's a prison planet, so they're there for a good reason. You don't want to feel too sympathetic to them, do you? Anyway, Ripley's character is portrayed with a very raw vulnerability by Sigourney Weaver. And I remember when this film was being made and when it was first shown that she shaved her head for the role, it was big news at the time. And I think that actually adds to her vulnerability because, you're taking away someone's hair. It's, it makes them vulnerable, things like that. But yeah, and there is the ultimate decision that she makes at the end, which adds a very tragic weight that very few sci-fi films attempt. And this was the perfect end of her story. And in a way, it really is. But more on that next week. we've got the off-screen deaths of the beloved characters from Aliens, Newt and Hicks, and of course Bishop as well. But this actually felt like a bit of a slap in the face to the emotional investment of the previous film. You know, we were invested in these characters, and for just have them die, let's be honest, that fucking sucked. You know, and I know there was talk recently of another Alien film with Hicks in it and bringing him back, and I thought that would be awesome. I can't remember. I think Neil Blomkamp was going to direct it, but that got shoved under, and they did Alien Romulus as well. But we will get to that one too, and yeah, I got some thoughts on that one, but more on that later. And also, we've got Lance Henriksen in this as Bishop and Bishop 2. But they're both very different characters. Bishop, it was good to hear him back as the android, you know, talking through his ruined body. But then seeing Bishop 2, the progenitor of the Bishop model series, come back as a human, like, it just wasn't the same. Like, you felt invested in Bishop, in Newt, in Hicks. So yeah. But overall, look, while the actors do their best, ultimately it comes down to the writing end. Well, let's look at that now. So now we're on to the directing and the writing, and oh boy, what a complete clusterfuck this was. Look, I'm not going to get into the whole, like I said, I'm going to try and steer clear of the whole studio interference and whatnot with David Fincher, but let's actually look at some of the positives. This was David Fincher's first film. He really does bring a very visually distinctive and gritty style to the franchise. You know, the film has a very stark and oppressive tone that mirrors the bleakness of the prison setting. That was really done really well. I enjoyed that part. The use of industrial rust-colored environments and the haunting wide shots of the Fury 161 really did elevate the atmosphere. It made it feel desolate and hopeless, which it is perfectly fitting for the narrative's grim tone. Alien 3 explores themes of death, sacrifice, and redemption from various points. Given Ripley one of her most emotionally complex roles and arcs in this series. Now, Fincher's version was heavily compromised by studio interference, and it did result in a film that he actually disowned. The lack of creative control led to a disjointed tone and pacing issues, and it's evident in both cuts. It's a patchwork of conflicting ideas. Yeah, and it leaves some sequences feeling underdeveloped and incoherent. Now, this next part that I'm going to go on to is something new, and just for this film, I did want to take a look at the differences between the two. Now, bear in mind, a lot of this is gleaned from internet sources and from what I watched on the assembly cut, so take it with a grain of salt. There might be a few discrepancies, but I've done my best to get the most accurate information of the difference between the two films. Okay, so for this part, I'm going to go over some key differences between the theatrical cut and the assembly cut. First off, we've got the runtime and the overall structure of the movie. The theatrical cut went for 114 minutes, whereas the assembly cut goes for 145 minutes. With over 30 minutes of additional footage, this improves character development. It clarifies certain key plot points and also enhances some of the emotional stakes. Alien birth scene. Now, in the assembly cut, the xenomorph gestates in an ox, suggesting a quadruped-style creature. In the theatrical cut, the alien is born from a prisoner's dog, leading to the same quadruped-style creature, but implying a very different host type. A smaller host. Does that affect the size of the alien? Well, this is actually a huge lore point, as the host affects the alien's physiology. And the assembly cut version adds more nuance to how this creature develops. And I really did enjoy seeing the creature. If you look at in Alien, when the chestburster first comes out, you see it running along there. In this one, you really do see it running along, hence the runner alien title. And I really like the look of that. The effects, not so much, but the look of it, I really did like. Golic's expanded role. The theatrical cut, Golic, played by Paul McGann, disappears halfway through the movie after being declared insane. Which they're not wrong, he is, and they make that very clear when he is first introduced. But in the assembly cut, Golic has a more significant subplot where he becomes fascinated with the xenomorph, and he believes it to be a divine being. He later releases it from captivity, and chaos ensues. Now, the impact of this is it adds actual thematic depth and mirrors the film's religious overtones. Golic sees the alien as judgment or God, and it aligns with the prisoner's monk-like spiritual views. It also gives the film a bit of a tragic secondary antagonist because he's enamored by the alien. He doesn't know what he's doing, and yeah, shit happens. Next, we have character development. The theatrical cut, secondary characters like Aaron, 85, Clemens, and Dylan are underdeveloped. Whereas in the assembly cut, that 30 minutes, it allows the characters to receive a little bit more backstory and some emotional grounding, especially characters like Dylan. He is given a more expanded role and really does feel it. Also, the rest of the prisoners, mostly, they don't become, well, it makes their sacrifices more resonant. I wouldn't say sympathetic, but it makes it more resonant. Another factor in this is the pacing. The theatrical cut, quicker pacing, more emphasis on action. However, several scenes are reduced or removed completely. So yeah, pacing's a little bit quicker. The assembly cut, however, has a more deliberate pace. It's got extended conversations between Ripley and Clemens and a slower, more methodical build-up to key events. Now, before we begin on this last point, spoiler alert. If you haven't seen this film, there will be a spoiler ahead. You've been warned. Now that you've had enough time, Ripley's chestburster ending. In the theatrical cut, and I remember watching this, I remember seeing this scene. Ripley falls into the furnace and the xenomorph queen bursts from her chest and she holds it in. She falls into the furnace and dies. But in the assembly cut, Ripley falls into the furnace before the chestburster emerges, dying quietly and deliberately. The assembly cuts version is a more subtle and probably a more respectful way. It removes any of the melodrama and special effects needed for that chestburster. It reinforces the theme of sacrifice over spectacle. Now on to the special effects. 1992. Well, this was a very, very mixed bag. Some of the effects are great and others not so much. I really like the design of the alien, and the actual physical shots and close-ups look great. Even some of the imposed shots, superimposed shots, the actual alien, the design of it looks really good. I got to be honest, that's probably one of the things I did like about this film overall. The sets, fantastic. They really do have that bleak industrial feel, and it really does set the mood well. But everything else, the early use of CGI for the xenomorph, it's notably jarring and it hasn't aged well. The alien often appears cartoonish when, it's like a composition against live action footage. It really breaks the immersion of the film. Like you're seeing this superimposed image of the alien, whereas in previous ones, we had physical aliens, like not real aliens, but physical effects doing the aliens. And that really, it just blended perfectly. Whereas this, it stands out like a sore thumb. Even some of the earlier outdoor scenes, they do look very dated. There's a graininess going across the screen like it's a storm or something like that. It just stands out as very poorly done. But again, the xenomorph close-up shots, it still holds up really well. And it's a really eerie and tactile menace. in all honesty, it's probably my favorite xenomorph design overall. So now on to rewatchability. Will I rewatch this one? Maybe. But I'm not going to watch it anytime soon. Except for Covenant and Romulus, this is probably my least watched film in the entire franchise. It's not that I hate the film, by no means, but following up from Aliens is going to be a really hard task, especially for a first-time director. So yeah, I would rewatch this one, but I'm not going to rush out and do so. Maybe I'll check out the theatrical cut instead. So, final verdict. The assembly cut is widely considered to be the definitive version of Alien 3 for fans and critics who want a more thoughtful, fleshed out experience. It doesn't fix all the flaws, but it does seem like a far more cohesive and dramatically satisfying film, and it's probably more faithful to Fincher's bleak vision of what he wanted and intended to have. So yeah, it's good, but I honestly, it dragged for me. I did feel myself, I actually had to watch this in 2 parts, so I just could not make it through. It was just, that pacing was just off for me. So yeah. Overall for a score, Alien 3 gets a 4.5 out of 10. Yeah, there you have it. That is my review of Alien 3. What did you guys think of this film? Have you seen it? Have you seen the theatrical or the assembly? Let me know. I'd be keen to hear your thoughts on both versions. Like, am I right? Am I wrong? Did I miss anything in those key differences? I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on this one. But before I dribble on too much, thank you very much for watching. If you haven't already, please do hit that thumbs up button. It'd be much appreciated. And of course, if you like movies, you like discussing movies, might as well hit that subscribe button and hit that notification bell so that way you're notified every time I do release a new review. Now, obviously, we've got my franchise coming up. We're pretty much halfway through the Alien franchise already. So yeah, what we got? We've got Resurrection, Prometheus, Covenant, and Romulus. Yeah, so we're almost at the halfway mark. So whew, is it uphill, downhill? Well, tune in to find out. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Have a great day. Bye.
Let's go down.